This is the sneaky one as well. So Lauren, we attacked Hunter's meta-analysis earlier, or systematic review earlier, by saying some of the studies within this systematic review had a very low sample size, okay? But this study is sample size n equals 30, which, now he doesn't know this study, but if he did...
You didn't read that study either. I know you didn't, because the study didn't prove what you thought it proved. Sometimes people don't read studies, sometimes it gets silly, whatever.
The main issue
brought out the personal attack.
The main issue that I have here, no, the main issue, having a better quality of life,
Hunter,
not committing suicide.
You haven't even read the study you just cited. You thought 20,000 transgender people were in it. You just admitted you're not a sociologist, so why are you defending the data?
Are you?
No, I'm not.
So then what does that have to, that has no relevance here.
Heck of a lot of bad studies that you haven't read and I haven't read fully.
Lauren, we've both been sent. Hold on, we've both. Come on, this is. You know that this is uncharitable. You're being Hold on, if I could just finish really quickly here. So LGBT issues, or specifically trans issues, I believe, right, is what we kind of wanted to focus on.
Correct.
Oh God.
Okay.
Yeah,
Why?
I don't really have much to say on the other stuff. And even on the trans stuff, you know, this may even be more questions than me actually making any sort of definitive statements, but.
Well, sure, yeah, I'd be happy to try and answer, you know, any questions you have. I think I'm kind of in an interesting place here, just considering the fact that, kind of like what I told you in DMs, I used to be a fan of your content. You know, I used to follow you really closely when I used to be pretty right-wing, and I used to believe a lot of the, you know, anti-trans narrative, if you want to call it that, or at least a lot of the anti-trans narrative, yeah. And, you know, I had questions also, but I felt like I kind of have found...
We can talk about matching energies, and we can talk about, like, matching rhetoric and everything here, too. It's, like, good to keep in mind for this conversation. I need to find one more of these alters, and I'm done with this. Just as I'm being critical because we're literally doing, like, a lay debate review, right? So just, like, I guess pointers for all sides or whatever. I would be very careful when having a conversation to try to avoid bringing up, like, the narrative or the whatever, because it makes you sound a little bit out there. Like, match somebody, like, oh, we want to talk about trans issues? Oh yeah, let's talk about trans issues, or things that you believe about trans issues, blah, 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 blah. Just as a minor thing. It's a minor itty bitty thing, okay? This is very, very small, not a huge point, but.
Some of the answers when it comes to this. So yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I mean, if we want to just start off, if you wouldn't mind you want to just explain, like, your general belief on this issue, maybe?
On which issue? I don't even know what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So you probably saw I did a debate with Xander Hall a few weeks ago, and I think that was when you messaged me right after. Most people agreed I did pretty okay in the debate. I don't know if it was because I did particularly well or because Xander walked himself into the ocean. I couldn't tell you. But on most issues, everyone thought I was at least pretty reasonable, except one, which was transgender issues, which I will admit even though he cited the wrong study at one point, he probably bested me, as I'm not the most well-versed in that subject. I'm not a doctor, nor am I transgender myself. So I decided to spend a bit of time before we had this chat looking into the issue. And what I found is that after doing a bit of research, I am even less certain than I was before. And
really?
there are three things that I know. One is I do not have the answers to how we tackle this issue of gender dysphoria and transgenderism in our society. Two, I don't think most people have the answers, not even the experts. And three, well, I don't really have all the answers and I don't know everything. I feel I have some very genuine concerns to our approaches with treatment towards youth who believe they may be transgender. So
sure. So your
that's where I'm at.
So your main concern with the transgender thing, it really comes down to.
Okay, remember what I said a month ago? They're talking about trans issues, aka it's gonna be puberty blockers and kids, boys, every time. That's what all these are. But yeah, if Hunter is keen and sharp and quick-witted and wise, Lauren has already, like, conceded enough at this point to where you can set the rest of this conversation up to be like a conversation on, like, who do you trust? Like, it's good that Lauren will readily admit, because a lot of conservatives want, like, hey, this is a really confusing subject. There's a lot of issues that are hard to understand, but she uttered that phrase, even the experts don't understand. So then it should be a conversation like, oh, well, who do we trust? Should it be, you know, screeching conservatives on Twitter? Should it be, you know, people that study this professionally? Lauren would probably default to the answer, well, it should be up to the parents. But, I mean, we could counter those arguments as well. But we'll see. We'll see where we go from here.
Children then with gender dysphoria, like, are you okay with adults, for example, pursuing like gender transition or treatment or whatever they might need? Is your contention more with the kids?
Adults can do whatever they want, but you know, when it comes to adults too, like for me, they can do what they want with their life. They can do what they want with their body. But I would certainly, if I had a friend who was going to do this, I would still say, hey, let's look at the research. Let's look at the studies. Let's look at the potential things that could go wrong here. Just because someone's an adult doesn't mean I want them to, oh yeah, go and do whatever you want with no caution, right? But when it comes to my actual, like, okay, this is something we actually need to talk about as a society, definitely more concerns lean around children. But I did want to ask you something, because I found a lot of times when I have these conversations with people that are in the more progressive sphere of things, we tend to talk past each other. We tend to not really know what each other is saying because we're speaking a different language. We're using different definitions for words. So I was wondering if we could actually start with defining some basic words that this conversation will be around, essentially.
Sure. I actually was hoping that we could also kind of talk about, you know, make sure we recognize the distinction between sex and gender too, because I think that can be really helpful for the conversation. Was that kind of what you were thinking?
So did you want to? Yeah, that's exactly it. Can we start with sex? What you would generally define sex as, and if you think it's binary?
Well, I mean, sex is generally speaking bimodal, which means that there's some like gray area and some nuance there. But generally speaking, yeah, there are two main sexes for the most part. That sex refers to like biological characteristics, so like genitals, hormones, that kind of thing. Gender, when I talk about gender here, and you know, that way that I guess the academic definition would be a set of social roles and behaviors that we apply to people or prescribe to people that have a certain biology. Now, some of these, just to be very clear, are correlated with biology, but they're not necessarily connected to biology. So, for example, I would say it is a prescriptive gendered role or gendered trait or gendered behavior, however you want to call it, that men are stronger than women. Now, men, generally speaking, are stronger than women.
What?
So that's where this sort of gendered prescription comes from. However, if a man is not strong, he's still a man, right? So that's kind of what I want to get at there.
Okay, something that I would be like really, really, really careful of, okay, just when you're having these conversations, okay, please, 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 okay, there are some things that we kind of know are true. Just acknowledge that and move on and don't pretend otherwise. So now maybe we'll get to a point to where maybe it kind of sounds like he's headed here. Like this idea that like men are generally stronger than women because socially like we kind of prescribe it, blah, blah, blah. Like this is a biological reality that like 99% of us just know is true. Not only is it like a biological reality that most of us know it's true, like it is important to acknowledge that for a variety of reasons. Like for instance, for the safety of women in like dating environments, right? Don't ever try to stake out a position that is like so clearly not the case. Because one, you lose a lot of the audience, and two, you kind of lose yourself in some of these arguments. And I think at some point when you take a step back and try to figure out what you're arguing for, you're going to realize that like, okay, fuck, I think I've like lost the plot, or like I'm getting like too far into my own like ideology or whatever, and it's starting to like get confusing. That's what he was saying. I'll go listen to this one more time, but that isn't what I took from that.
Trait or gendered behavior, however, it is a prescriptive, very clear, are correlated with biology, but they're not necessarily connected to biology. So for example, I would say it is a prescriptive gendered role or gendered trait or gendered behavior, however you want to call it, that men are stronger than women. Now, men, generally speaking, are stronger than women.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys don't understand the words or not, but when he says it is prescriptive, what that statement means is that it ought to be this way. It should be. That's what prescriptive means. Now, maybe you think he said descriptive, or he meant to say descriptive. I'm just saying, just like, of all the things that we could go for, like, do like hair or something, because hair is clearly something that could be either way. Hair, like long hair, short hair, that's like very clearly like, you know, we prescribe genders have different hairdos, okay? And there's not really a reason for it to be one or another, okay? But, okay. but I mean, like, we can kind of move on, I guess. I don't know.
So that's where this sort of gendered prescription comes from. However, if a man is not strong, he's still a man, right? So that's kind of what I want to get at there with, yeah, gender is the social prescriptions, and then sex refers to the biological characteristics. Did that answer the question?
Sure. I just want to clarify what you mean by there's gray area with.
I think he's more or less saying what I'm saying. It's just the way that he's phrasing it is a little bit confusing. But I think he's kind of saying. I think he's saying what I just said. I think it's just the way that he phrases it is a little bit confusing. But I think so.
Sex.
Well, sex being bimodal, that just means that it's on kind of a spectrum. So like some people might have female genitalia, but like a mismatch of chromosomes, right? That's a good example of how sometimes sex, there are gray areas there. But generally speaking...
So that's where I disagree with you. I think sex is binary, not bimodal, since sex is based on gametes.
But that's not the only thing sex is based on. I wanted to have a conversation with you about transgender people, not necessarily
right,
sex.
But I want to make sure, but these things are important. I want to make sure that we have,
I mean, if you want to, for the sake of the
understanding that we disagree.
Sure. Okay. I mean, yeah, we can.
Because I think it's important because when we talk about being transgender, in some cases people will bring up, oh, okay, well, there's mixed match biology, so then there's an in-between between sex. I don't believe that sex is bimodal. I think that there is one or the other sex. I don't, because sex is based on gametes. That's why it's called sex. It's based on whether your body is built to produce egg or sperm, what your reproductive roles are. That's what all anisogamous mammals base their sex on.
I mean, I'm not really, I really want to make sure that we focus this debate on the issue of transgender people. I'm not really here to debate you on the intricacies and of sex. I don't want to just...
I think for purposes of this conversation, I don't know if you ever need to go into sex is bimodal versus binary. The idea that sex is this perfectly binary thing, first of all, that's such an arbitrary, you can argue it any way you want. It doesn't, sex doesn't technically exist, right? It's this is a way that we categorize things. It's not they're this is a really dumb argument to get hung up on. I mean, I guess if you really want to get into biology memes or philosophy memes, you can do it, but I don't think this is necessary for these arguments, but we might get a lot of disagreement here. Good luck.
Make an appeal to authority necessarily, but I'd be happy to send you an article that explains how sex is bimodal. I mean, this is kind of the accepted scientific consensus on this issue, at least. But even for the sake of argument,
I disagree with that.
But I mean, even for the sake of argument, then we could just go ahead and say, okay, fine, there are only two sexes. That doesn't change anything for the discussion when it comes to trans people.
Okay, the throwing in, this is just me personally, I think that the whole I can send you an article or whatever is kind of cringe. But I like this movement here where he's okay, whatever. We can just say sex is binary and move on because it's really not important to this conversation. I think that's really good.
Well, no, it really does when people are trying to base someone's biological sex and say that actually biological sex has a gray area based on secondary sex characteristics. It really, in fact, gender and sex are the two biggest questions in considering the topic of transgenderism. Because so you look at even people that are intersex, and in 99% of cases with people who are intersex, they are obviously one sex or the other.
But that's because we don't. That's not the.
If they have a
that's not the only way that we determine
Y chromosome in there.
That's not the only way that. No, that's not the only way that we determine sex. But I don't.
So the easiest counterexample that I could think of to that, and again, none of this really matters, but I'm pretty sure that women that are born with XY chromosomes but androgen insensitivity, I don't think they go through life having the internal experience of feeling like a man, or if they have, I've never heard of that before. That's, I guess, maybe something to read about in the future, but technically you can be born with an XY chromosome and your XY chromosomes, and you can have androgen insensitivity, because remember, producing a hormone doesn't mean anything in your body. You have to have a sensitivity to it as well, right? In order to be sensitive to it and have responses to it. I don't know if those women go through things oh man, I'm trans, I'm a man or whatever. I don't know if they even know until they get genetically tested for it, because they have infertility problems or something like that. But
I don't really want to get hung up on this. I want to talk about the broader
sexual expression.
No, I'm talking about how they measure, how scientists measure sex. How scientists measure sex within the. Let me go ahead and, if you want, I can send you an article on this.
Don't do that.
But I don't even know if that's. But I don't even know if that's necessary. I think
we disagree here.
Okay, let's just
send you an article on this as well.
Okay, fine. Let's just agree to disagree on this then, because that doesn't really change anything when it comes to the transgender conversation and my general belief that trans people are valid and that the treatment for trans people seems to be obviously the best move for trans people, right? To help them get better from gender dysphoria.
Okay, so quickly, since we're just going to agree to disagree on sex, can we just confirm gender at least?
Yeah. So
I think I generally agree with your description of gender, which is the sociological, roles that society defines.
Right.
One specific sex of having, but that definition does vary depending on which dictionary you look at, right?
The definition can vary, and it also can vary with when colloquially versus the way it's used in like a technical academic sense. But obviously, since we're having a kind of technical conversation, it sounds good that we agree on the difference between sex and gender for the most part. But yeah, when we're talking about transgender individuals, we're talking about people suffering from gender dysphoria, which is when their identity is a mismatch from their...
Okay, so this is something you got to be really, really careful with, and it's not really that important, but some trans people will get very upset, is arguably you don't need to have... you don't need to be suffering from gender dysphoria to be considered a trans person. Some trans people would call you a true scum if you say, if you don't have gender dysphoria, you're not actively seeking, sex reassignment surgery or hormone replacement therapy, then that means that you're not a real transgender person. You're not a real trans person. There are trans people that will fight you over that if you try to kind of gatekeep transness to people that just have gender dysphoria. So it's, transgender just means mismatch between your assigned sex and the gender identity that you feel internally.
Their biology, and it seems pretty clear that the best way to help trans people get better is to obviously treat the gender dysphoria, right?
I mean, you say it's very clear, but not even all transgender activists agree that transitioning is the cure for all transgender people.
Well, it's because it's not the cure. That's not the cure all for transgender people. There are multiple steps to be taken, but transition is obviously one of the larger steps we can take. Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead, please.
Okay. That's all right. We can get into why or why not after, but can we look at before we kind of get down to the nitty gritty, the studies where we're absolutely not going to agree on things potentially, or have some, it's going to get down to a numbers game. Can we talk a little bit more about the philosophy of this all? Because I did want to get through a bit of that first before we get right down to
Wait,
numbers.
is Lauren still in YouTube
Sure,
chat?
I mean, yeah, like what do you mean, the philosophy, like the social construct and what that looks like?
So the idea of gender, would you agree, was kind of defined in the 40s by Simone de Beauvoir and other feminist activists who wanted to separate the idea of sex and gender because they didn't want one's sex to determine what their role in society was.
I'm not really sure exactly where the term gender originated from. I'm more interested in how it's applied today, though. And so I'm not sure.
Well, so I think this is interesting because that was the initial conception of why we had gender. We wanted to say, you know what? Sex is purely your biology. There's male and female, and before it was kind of like, okay, and based on your sex, you have a gender role in society and you cannot escape that. So feminists looked at that and they said, actually, your expression of your sexuality and how you interact with the rest of society should not be based on simply your biology. So if we separate sex and gender and we make gender into the social roles that people have in society and make that something that people can vary in, there are very feminine men and very feminine women, then we have created liberation for women, because you can have a person who is biologically female that can play a male role in society if they would like, or a female role in society, or in between.
So what does that what does that have to do with anything? I mean, yeah, of course, gender is gender being a social construct.
We're going to a reverse of sex and gender, where we are saying again, actually, you know, when a girl plays with trains, she's now a boy.
No, no,
And-
no. Hold on. Whoa. We're going a little bit off there. Let's try to stay on the philosophical element of gender. So, gender being a social construct exists as a result of human interaction, and whether we want to call it gender or not, gender has always existed among humans. And gender has always had no bearing on biology and has also changed over time. So, like, for example, at one point, it would have been a gendered behavior for men to wear high heels because it was masculine to be taller. That was gender, and even though they didn't call it, it's great. All right, well, let me just put the stream on pause here, Lauren. I'm so sorry.
No worries. That's all right.
Let's just go ahead and continue with
Are we back?
Yeah, people are saying it's back. We'll go ahead and continue with the conversation. It'll be posted up.
Can't even remember.
I know, right? I think
Gone.
we were talking about the philosophical makeup of. That's right. We were talking about
we
gender.
can
and
move on from that if you want.
Yeah, we were talking about gender
I
and
don't
sex.
mind moving on from it.
Okay, cool. So we kind of agree then that sex and gender are different for the most part, for the sake of this discussion too. So
What's
it sounds
the
like we're
titanium
making
equivalent, real
some
quick?
decent
Sorry.
ground here. So like when trans people, right, are and trans youth also, when they have gender dysphoria, when they have that gender incongruence and that depression and that anxiety and that
Adamantium,
discomfort in
gotcha.
their own body, it's been medically proven repeatedly that the best way to help trans people and help them
Okay, real quick. When you're fighting for treatments for trans people, okay, you gotta stop saying it has been medically proven or this is like the proven blah 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 blah. Okay, trans issues are incredibly new, and you are setting yourself up to always lose arguments when you start off with anything that's strong. Okay, like all of this stuff is still like relatively new in terms, especially related to children. Don't ever try to present the arguments that are strong because you're gonna get like confounding research that shows like, well, maybe this or maybe that, blah 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 blah, and you're not really gonna have good responses to it, and then you're gonna get duck or z'd, and then people are gonna laugh at you online. Okay, don't be stronger than you can be. Okay, on some of these arguments, you gotta be careful.
get better is by putting them through treatment, right? Doesn't that just kind of follow?
Rather, like the argument should be is that like right now, it seems like this is the best thing. This is what's recommended by professional institutions. So I think that this is what we ought to follow. That's a much easier, that's a stronger argument. It's the one you should defend. It's true really of all of medicine, right? Because there's a lot of medicine where we don't know 100% in the beginning and we try things and we see what works, and if side effects happen, we change, right? Medicine changes. It's not like religion, right? Where it's the same thing for the entirety of its fucking existence. You know, it'll adapt and evolve and change based on new evidence and everything, which is fine.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. Have there actually been well-done studies showing that is the best line of action?
Yes, there has been, but also I'd want to know what specifically, like, has what, like puberty blockers? Because I'd be happy to, if you want to focus on puberty blockers.
I was going to say it depends on what you mean by treatment, because there are so many approaches, aren't there?
Well, usually what happens is that, you know, generally, if a child is showing signs of gender dysphoria, according to the American Psychological Association, you have to be showing gender dysphoria for a minimum of 6 months consistently. So when trans people are suffering from gender dysphoria, they meet with a therapist, they meet with a doctor, they meet with psychologists. It's a long process. And keep in mind that at least in the US, there's only like 50 gender clinics in the entire country. So it's not like it's this really easy thing to get a hold of. And then after a lot of consultation and talking to the child, sometimes they are put on puberty blockers, which, yes, like all medicine, has potential side effects or potential risks, but generally speaking, they seem to be relatively safe and the benefits greatly outweigh the risks.
Okay, so I would reckon that there's probably more research around adults, since bringing hormone blockers and certainly sex reassignment surgery to kids would be fairly new and
Sex
controversial
reassignment,
and not
just,
even allowed.
Sorry to cut you off again. I do want to make sure I let you make a point. But just to clarify, sex reassignment surgery that's not really happening to children. I think it's the Endocrine Society actually recommends that. That doesn't
That's
even.
what I was saying.
Yeah,
so
that's okay. Sure. So
what I'm
let's
saying
just focus
is, can we quickly just, like, are there any studies in adults? Because I reckon adults would have the best research around them, since you can do more with adults than with kids. Do you have any studies that show that putting people on hormones, giving people sex reassignment surgery, that has positive outcomes and improves their quality of life.
Yeah. Do you want me to send you like a specific study? I have a meta-analysis here from Cornell with 55 different studies. They're all peer-reviewed. And I can just read you this quick little summary if you want. It says, this search found a robust international consensus in the peer-reviewed literature that gender transition, including medical treatments such as hormone therapy and surgeries, improves the overall well-being of transgender individuals. The literature also indicates that greater availability of medical and social support for gender transition contributes to better quality of life for those who identify as trans. Now, I can send you this if you want. This is...
So, yeah, no, I just opened it. This isn't a meta-analysis.
What is it?
It's a systemic review.
Okay, so it's a systemic review of 55 different studies that are all peer-reviewed. And it found that...
Do you know the difference between a meta-analysis and a systematic
I do know the
review?
difference, yeah, but if you don't like this one, I actually do have a meta-analysis here also.
Well, no, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this, because I have seen a bit of the Cornell systematic review, and I just want the audience to understand the difference between a meta-analysis and a systematic review, because it does matter. A meta-analysis is when you use statistical techniques to try to find out, to try to combine these studies and find a result and find how good they are. But you use statistical techniques. A systematic review does not use any techniques. It literally just compiles studies. You could go into Google Scholar and create your own systematic review.
All right, well, I can send you,
combining a bunch of studies.
If you're not too happy with that one, I can send you a different one, which is a systematic review and meta-analysis of quality of life.
I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this study because it's important, and because a lot of people tend to name the Cornell meta-analysis as an absolute, this is what proves.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Everyone in chat is saying that Lauren is wrong on this. I don't know if it's just because you hate her or not. My understanding is that this is true. So this is my understanding. I could be wrong. My understanding is that like a meta-analysis seeks to like bring together a whole bunch of different data sets and then try to apply like a similar statistical method or formula or whatever to all of these different data sets to get a bigger data set, basically, right? So it would be cool if we could do a study on rent control in 50 different cities, but we've only got like all of these like kind of like discrete studies. Well, let's see if we can combine them all. Let's see if we can use like some unifying formula to analyze it, and then now we can say like, well, look, we have a way bigger data set now of 50 cities. This is a meta-analysis. Now, a review of the literature, or she's calling it systematic review. I thought it was a system. It must be, is it systemic or systematic? No, I'm not sure. But like a review of the literature might say like, let's go through like, what are the conclusions of all of these studies? What do they generally point towards? Like, is a favorability, is a non-favorability, but it's not about combining, different data sets. Now, that being said, a systemic review versus a meta-analysis, I don't know if that matters here. I don't know if there's like a meaningful difference here, but yeah, these are two different things. Let me see if anything is being said incorrect here. I'm sorry.
How good they are, but you use statistical techniques. A systematic review does not use any techniques. It literally just compiles studies. You could go into Google Scholar and create your own systematic review.
All right, well, I can send you
okay. This point that she says is a little bit bullshit. Like, you could go into Google Scholar and create your own system, because what she's trying to discredit systematic reviews. But if the person doing the review is a scholar that's generally educated in an area and is qualified to like review literature, then their review, their collection of all the different data, and then kind of like looking at it and then go, like, it can be a valid collection of data going through, right? There's not an issue there. It might be the case that a meta-analysis might not be possible. It might be the case, for instance, like, let's say that now I'm not a researcher and I don't have a PhD and I don't do stats, but this would be like a guess I would make. Let's say that we want to look at the difference in the longitudinal effects. So going back, 30 or 40 years away from having a SRS or HRT, and we want to see how trans people turn out. Let's say that I have 5 different studies. Let's say all 5 of these studies start at different age ranges. Let's say that all 5 of these studies look at different treatments. One does HRT, one does SRS, one does a combination of, right? And then let's say that some of these studies control for variables like socioeconomic status, some of these studies control for variables like family and friend support, and others don't, right? If I have a collection of those studies, now my guess as a non-researcher, my guess is going to be it is impossible to do a good meta-analysis using this collection of data. The data sets are too dissimilar to combine them adequately and give a responsible, coherent answer, or put these in a data set that's responsibly done. It's just the way that the data was measured and collected initially is just it's too dissimilar. Not similar enough. It's not good. But let's say that we read through all 5 of these studies, heterogeneity in data. There you go. But let's say that we read through all of these studies, and all of them are overwhelmingly positive, high confidence intervals, statistically significant differences, right? That all of these treatments were incredibly positive for these people. So we could do a systematic review of the literature, and we go, okay, well, we looked at 5 different studies. Now we understand these are done, but like in general, man, so many positive effects of result, right? So this might be an example of where a systematic review might be okay to do, but like a meta-analysis is not possible, right? Okay, sorry. So a systematic review isn't always bad, and a meta-analysis isn't always good. There can be problems with meta-analyses as well, all right? Sorry, okay.
A bunch of studies.
If you're not too happy with that one, I can send you a different one, which is a systematic review and meta-analysis of quality of life.
I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this study because it's important, and because a lot of people tend to name the Cornell meta-analysis as an absolute, this is what proves that gender affirming.
Okay, keep in mind that now it's funny because, so as a layman, before I got into all of this, okay, when people talk about like research and studies, my brain is thinking that like, man, if we think of trans people, there's probably like 20,000 studies on that stuff. If we think of rent control, there's probably like 10,000 studies on that stuff. Yeah, kind of. But in reality, when you're in any big topic, there's generally like only like 3 to 5 big studies that everybody points to. And then a lot of other literature will build off of those studies. So there might be like a really famous researcher that publishes like hard publishing about immigration. Or there might be like people that publish about like certain socioeconomic or social issues. I'm sorry. There might be people that publish, and generally there's going to be like 3 or 4 or 5 like really big studies that everybody points to, you know? We all talk about like systemic bias that exists in society against like black people when it comes to job hirings. How many people point back to that same study in the early 2000s about the last names where people tried to measure for callbacks, right? So even though there's a lot of studies, there's generally only a few big ones that people will cite. And there's generally only a few big ones for any given topic. So that being said, if you are going to cite them, you need to be familiar with them. And you probably need to Google them because there's probably going to be responses to them. And whoever you're talking to, you should assume, if you're not talking to like a rando, you should assume they're probably going to be familiar with like whatever study or meta-analysis or systemic review or systematic review that you're going to bring up. It would be really, really, really stupid of them not to. Unless you're talking to somebody that's just kind of a dipshit. Like, you should be ready for them to be ready to counter like, oh, well, obviously there's this study, right? You should be ready for that.
Surgery works. Most of the studies in the systematic review have a sample size of under 100, with some of them in here having under 20.
That's trying to invalidate.
That is not representative of the general population. One study was added twice by mistake, and the largest studies in here actually have the most severe problems.
There are always going to be issues when it comes to compiling data like this. A systematic review, though, it's supposed to look over all of the different peer-reviewed literature and come to a general conclusion. If you're not happy...
Okay, so real quick, okay? So technically, Lauren is right on everything she says, okay? Our sample sizes are small. Sometimes that's why we appeal to systematic reviews, is because we don't have huge sample size studies, okay? Now, 100 is not necessarily small, okay? But they are small sample sizes, and they can be difficult to draw conclusions from. But the correct answer is, you're right, it can be. So we should do more research. However, with the research that we have now, this is the direction that it points us to, and then that's why we keep doing more and more research. So we authorize new treatments as research shows promise, and then we move forward into those directions. Don't try to argue or fight on that point, okay? None of this is going to be rock solid proven, okay? None of this is going to be 100%, right? You acknowledge that. You don't have to like, you're not like ceding your argument. Like you don't have to try to fight for the like, oh, well, this is a 100% guaranteed treatment. Blah, blah. No, just you say like, oh yeah, of course. Like, yeah, these are small sample sizes. These are small studies, but this is all we have right now. And all of it looks pretty promising. Like, that's it, right? And any reasonable human being can't really disagree with you there, right? It's all like, you're right. Yeah, okay, sure, right? Like, look at all the stuff on Reddit that gets posted where people are like, oh, MDMA being used for PTSD treatment, blah, 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 right? Some of these studies are like literally like sample size 9. It's like 9 different couples used like MDMA or whatever, or 9 different people used like, right? But that's because that's how these initial studies work, right? It's really, 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 really hard to like, oh, you know, I'm a researcher. I think that this would be a really good idea. Let me just go ahead and get 10,000 people together so that I can get a really big study. It never works that way. It is so hard to get funding for these studies, especially if you're not researching anything with a commercial purpose, and especially if you're not already like a tenured researcher with tons of history behind you, and especially if it's not a topic that there's like a ton of intense interest around that you can easily get like grant or corporate money to research. Yeah, just studies are going to be small. 99% of studies are going to be sample size less than 50 people. It's just hard. And then if you want to get into actual like real issues, a lot of these studies like massively disproportionately overrepresent college kids, because oftentimes, especially if you're a graduate student and you need to do a study, you're going up and down the hallways at your university asking kids like, hey, do you want to take a survey? Because I need blah, blah, blah. You're not paying Gallup, you know, $5,000 for them to do like telephone calls around your, like, yeah, there's a lot, like this stuff is hard to do. Okay. All right. Sorry.
I think that going through individual and trying to pick off like sample sizes, do you have counter data to prove your position? Or
I do, and I'm happy to talk about it, but I think it's a big problem when a lot of people, certainly I know you're not in the bread tube community in particular, but a lot of people in the bread tube community, a lot of people in progressive circles, they tend to, in debates, just throw studies at people and say, I'm correct because study, because study, because study. And then they haven't read the studies. They don't know how the study was done. I mean, in this Cornell systematic review, there are things in here that aren't even studies. They're just cost-benefit analysis of transitioning that doesn't answer any questions, that are no original research.
There are still 55 different studies
Haru
here.
and Campbell, 2015 in there.
There's still different.
Bailey, Ellis, and McNeil, which had one of the highest sample sizes in there. It was a narrative analysis that utilized an online survey, which was promoted by LGBT groups and support organizations.
There are going to be
that is
Lauren,
a non-biased sample size.
How do you get a non-biased sample size? Like, technically, if you want to go into the methodological errors, you can, but I would say that I think that it would be more polite to acknowledge that beforehand that's going to happen, to give your opponent time to prepare. Because even for me, I'm not going to read through every single study that I cite. Like generally, I'm just going by abstracting conclusions because I don't have time to read through. If I really, really, really want to like argue with a topic, then I'll read through entire studies, okay? Like I did for my first debate with Lauren, for all of the Borjas and Card shit back and forth on the Mario Boltliff shit. But like generally, like especially to a layperson, it's not usually needed to go through like all the text of a study. I mean, we can go through like methodological errors, but I just something that I think that is a little bit irritating is that I think people just have a really big misconception about how scientific research works. Actually, we've seen a lot of that. And everything, and the coronavirus stuff too. I think people have this big misconception that it's like, oh, scientific study. Well, what is a good scientific study? Well, one, sample size at least 5,000. Otherwise, you're doing fake science for sure. Like two, absolutely no bias or confounding variables or anything. Every single variable is controlled for. Every single data set is homogeneous. Every single person is followed up on. 100% response rates from every person. 100% double blind. Like, this is just... It's awesome when those types of like studies can happen. That's sick, but it is not the norm for scientific research. We just don't live in those worlds where it's kind of like it would be like if engineers designed buildings and bridges for the frictionless vacuums that we work with in our high school and college physics classes, right? It's just nothing is ever that clean, unfortunately, unless you get a lot of funding for a really, really, really big study, which is incredibly rare. This is like less than 1%. So man, I get a lot of emails and shit. I should bring on research. I've learned so much because I'm saying this like I'm making fun of you guys, but even like 5 years ago, probably when I was 27, I would have still assumed like, oh yeah, like what is good science? Like, oh, it's this or that or that or that, but it's not. And I get so many emails from researchers that are like, hey, Destiny, like, so I'm a researcher, by the way. I spend 50% of my life, doing grant proposals, and then the other 50%, let me talk to you about how hard it is to get funding for studies, and blah 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 blah. And then there's like, yeah, it's not as pretty and clean as we wish it would be, but that's okay, right? Yeah, that's okay. The point, Lauren says, the point is we do have good studies to compare. We just haven't gotten to that point yet. Yeah, sure. We just keep following the science. All right, sorry.
There's going to be room for error,
For
of course.
sample.
If you don't like the Cornell study, I'm happy to send you multiple other studies. But by going through the methodology and trying to like cast doubt on the study, that's not really a good argument.
So like, I think that like for Hunter here, I think that like the good retort is that like, yeah, we can find like individual studies that have issues, and we might, you know, gripe about the methodology of some, you know, like, oh, you don't like the fact that an LGBT group posted this, you know, we'll ignore this, how strange it is that you would think that, I mean, like these are trans people, so most of this data is probably going to come from like LGBT-ish areas. But like, it seems to be the case that the overwhelming amount of data points in a positive direction. Even if we might have some issues with individual studies, like generally, like overwhelmingly, like there seems to be some consensus support around, you know, things related to transitioning. So whether that means just HRT or SRS and HRT or whatever other stuff, or other types of therapies or whatever, like, yeah, it's just go from there. Okay, don't overplay your hand.
I'm curious if you have
Hunter, studies are only as good as their methodology.
I'm curious if you have alternative data that proves that it's not good for trans people.
I'm not the one trying to put children through hormone therapy. I'm the one saying we need to be patient and we need to
Well,
get
hold on.
better data.
This was an overall systematic review, I believe, of adults, and that's what you asked for. You asked for stuff with adults. I can send you a different study. It's not a meta-analysis, but it's still a study on the benefits of puberty blockers. for
Would you
children.
at least agree that methodology matters?
Of course, methodology matters, but I also think that it's kind of dishonest to try and poke holes in the methodology when you're not willing to provide data, like alternative
Hunter,
data.
I don't need to counter studies when your own studies are of poor quality.
Well, do you want me to
Like,
send
it's
you a
not-
different meta-analysis? This is a systematic.
Ah, fuck. So that's just not true, right? Because studies, quote unquote, of poor quality, these are the starting grounds that we use for all scientific research, right? Like every scientific research starts with like some shitty initial study where it's like, oh, this is probably cause for further investigation, right? Like I wish I had examples of this offhand. Like, how many times do you have somebody that like makes a formula and tries to plug in some variables? Like, wait a second, this doesn't work. Or wait, hold on, wait, this isn't broken. Or like, this doesn't make sense or whatever. And then you do more and more investigation. Like, oh, okay, well, hold on, let's see if we can, you know, like look at this and blah blah blah. And then like that's kind of like you can call them shitty studies. It feels unfair to say that, but like technically, shitty studies are where good studies, you know, begin from. Is that a mimic? Oh yeah, it is. Oh, please don't like get melted. Yeah. Fuck. I think that if Hunter had a better understanding of like how the scientific research here works, I think he could counter these points a little bit better, but.
Review and
Yeah, I'm
meta-analysis
happy
of
for
quality
you
of
to.
life and psychosocial outcomes from the Wiley Online Library.
Okay, let's see this.
That's another meta-analysis. And then, but again, like we're kind of getting down in the weeds here. You asked me for studies about adults. Do you want to go back and talk about puberty blockers and the way that that helps children? Here's a study.
No. Let's look at this study because I don't want you can't just throw studies one after another at me. We have to actually look at the studies, go through them a bit, and then we can move on to the next one. Just throwing
And
studies
this
at
is
someone
lower
not a
quality evidence.
conversation.
This I'm admitting right now that this is a little bit lower quality evidence, but when it comes to social sciences, it's extremely. I was actually just having a conversation yesterday with the
No, don't do this.
minoring in statistics.
He's about to undermine his whole
When it comes
point.
to social sciences, you know, it's really hard to control for all of these variables. We have to work with what we have, with the limitations that comes with
Okay, no,
social
that's okay.
sciences.
All right. I thought he was
And
gonna be a little
what we
harsher.
have right now, these are the meta-analyses that suggest that sex reassignment tends to better the transgender individual.
Okay, he's come back to the general point, and he's correct here. Okay, he found himself. Okay, he came back. All right, Sora's shadow didn't kill him, or what? I don't know. I don't plan on Kingdom Hearts to make Kingdom Hearts. Okay, all right.
Okay, and I'm assuming on this Wiley study, Murad, that you read the summary of it at least.
I'm
Correct?
already acknowledging that it's lower quality evidence, but that's because of
No,
social.
Hunter, there's low quality evidence and there's very low quality. And the people who wrote the study say it is very low quality. This is 7 of the studies in here were only questionnaires. Only 3 had control groups, and the control groups didn't even match the criteria.
Do you have
none of the
data
studies
that
were
counter-
randomized,
do you have
so
data
none
that-
of them were representative
I
of
just
the average
hold on.
population.
I just tried to explain that when it comes to social sciences like this, it's really hard to control for all of those different variables. Secondly, anybody can look at studies and say this is poor quality. That's not really an argument.
Oh wait, can you link me? I think I'm looking at the wrong Wiley Online study. Can you link me the one you're using?
Is it the hormonal therapy and sex reassignment, a systematic review from 2010?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you're looking at the right one.
Don't.
Okay.
So that's not really, I don't think that's a
Yeah.
very solid argument. And if you want, we can go ahead and look at what you asked me originally, which was pubertal suppression for transgender youth. And of this one, the conclusion is this is the first study in which associations between access to pubertal suppression and suicidality are examined. There is a significant inverse association between treatment with pubertal suppression during adolescence and lifetime suicidal ideation among transgender adults who ever wanted this treatment. Now, I've heard you talk before. I listened to some of your discussion with Xander Hall. I think it was a pretty interesting discussion. And you made it really clear that, you care about transgender people. You recognize that
Of course.
they're struggling, of course. And I think that that's true, but I just don't understand how you can say you care about transgender people, but then be against what seems to be the treatment as of right now.
I don't think you can I think with all the contention and the data and the sources brought up so far, I don't know if that conclusion hits as hard as you want it to, because so far it seems like we've had a huge issue explaining the strength of the data, and we've acknowledged a lot of errors in the data. I don't think he's done a good job at explaining why those. I'm just trying to think of this from like a third party that doesn't know anything. I don't think he's done a great job of explaining why all of those issues are acceptable. Because right now it kind of sounds like Lauren is making the better point to where it's like, oh, well, your data might have problems, so how do you deal with that? And I don't feel like I've gotten an adequate answer to that yet. That's my feeling, though, but maybe a different audience member might hear it differently. I don't know.
Sure. Because I care about people that are struggling with gender dysphoria, and because I absolutely care about children, I want to ensure that people are getting the proper treatment and not just jump into something that seems like a popular social fad with a lot of really poorly done research. And if you have
So
the
what's
data
your solution?
that shows, that this is actually helping and this is actually improving lives, like, I'm not a psychopath. If I were given an option, tell you this, if I were given an option between a child who is going to commit suicide, and we know this 100%, or we can use an experimental treatment on them, I'm going to pick the experimental treatment every single time.
So this
I'm
is
not a
another issue, though.
psychopath.
This is the kind of straw man, though, is this isn't an experimental treatment. The FDA has already approved puberty blockers for children who aren't even transgender if they go through what's called precocious puberty, where you enter puberty too early. These aren't experiments
and
being
there
done.
have been studies done on that show it lowers the IQ of girls who have been on it by 7 points.
I mean,
Okay, so you got to be so careful when you're trying to say they're not experimental. So I don't know if Lauren is aware of it. I don't think she is, because I think if she was aware of it, I think she would have jumped to bring this up, right? If these treatments are so 100%, for sure that's why they should be and they're really good. Was it Denmark or Sweden that just recently said we're stopping all of the hormone treatments for children? We're stopping the puberty blocker thing for children. I think it was some Scandinavian country that just recently did that. Was it Sweden? Yeah, because it's clearly none of this is a settled science, okay? But like SSRIs aren't like Hunter is making stronger statements about like hormone therapy for children, it seems, than like I would make for SSRIs for adults, which have like 60 years of research behind them, Also, I don't, and this is me being honest because I'm not sure, I don't know what he means when he says FDA approved treatments. Is it called an off-label prescription when you prescribe something that is approved by the FDA but not as a treatment for a particular health issue? Because, for instance, so hydroxychloroquine is an FDA-approved treatment, but it's approved for malaria, but you can do an off-label prescription if you're desperate for people who were doing it for a while for the coronavirus, right? Now, we know as of now that there's no evidence that hydroxychloroquine helped, but it was something that you could do an off-label prescription of before. But just because it's approved as an FDA treatment doesn't mean that it might be approved for a particular cause. Now, I don't know where we're at in terms of the strength of FDA treatments related to trans people, but that would be something that I would be like very cautious of. Okay. Sorry. There's a lot of there's a lot of misunderstandings related to like medical research. We saw this with the patents and the coronavirus and everything too. And you see it with conspiracy theorists as well when they talk about like how government I feel like a lot of this stuff is just born out of people just not necessarily having like even like just a really basic understanding of how all these institutions kind of work together.
I would be very curious to see those studies. Listen, when it comes to medication, there's always going to be a risk. Every time, anytime we take a medication in general, right? We are recognizing subconsciously that, hey, there are risks and there are benefits. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? or
is true.
vice versa. When it comes to, like, if I told you right now, how would you feel about giving your kid a medication that has potential side effects of turning their eyes yellow, making them vomit, diarrhea, a fever, possible like intestine infections? You would probably be like, hold up, that
like
doesn't sound
ibuprofen
too
or
safe.
Tylenol or something?
But that's
or?
amoxicillin, the most common cold/flu medication we give to children. Like,
Amoxicillin cold/flu medication. Wait, I thought amoxicillin is a broad spectrum antibiotic. Influenza and the cold are viruses, or you would need an antiviral. I think that, but whatever. We get the point. Okay.
ADHD medication has been linked to long-term, like infertility, long-term use in mammals.
I know. I have ADHD.
We give that medication to children. Like this is how medicine works. There are risks and there are benefits. And when you look at this puberty blockers thing, you can either look at it from there's a negligible chance of a slightly lower decrease of bones, which by the way would improve once they get older and go on HRT, and then maybe like a very slim chance of like infertility occurring. Maybe these are slim, very unlikely things to happen versus for what?
I think it's also really good. Like he laid out a correct argument that there are side effects to medication, right? But after you lay that out, don't like run from it or hide from it, right? He laid out like everything. He laid out that like, oh, medication have risk, blah, 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 blah. But then don't be like, oh, it's a slim, negligible, blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, well, just be honest. Own the side effects. Like, it's okay. It's okay to own the side effects.
To live a generally better life, a better quality of life, and not hang yourself when you're an adult. I think that that's generally a good thing.
Why do these guys have exclamation marks over
Yeah, for sure. I find, because I watched a few of your other debates before coming on here, and I find you do an appeal to authority thing a lot. Like, this is FDA approved, therefore it's good, it's perfect.
No, that's not what I said.
These organizations.
That's not what I said.
Do you agree that the FDA have made mistakes before and approved?
Okay, real quick, because nobody understands how this fallacy works, okay? There are two types of fallacious appeals to authority, okay? The first type of a fallacious appeal to authority is when I say, my mom told me that if I take this medication, I'll be safe. She's a doctor. But then I find out that my mom has like a doctorate of English, right? That's a fallacious appeal to authority, okay? You're appealing to an authority and you are just saying that like they have authority over something, but it's not. They actually don't have authority over that particular thing. They have authority over a different domain, right? That's the first fallacious appeal to authority. The second fallacious appeal to authority is that when provided with an argument, if you try to fight back against that argument by just saying like, well, no, this person has more authority. So for instance, let's say that I cite a researcher and I say, look, this researcher says this conclusion. And then somebody's like, oh, well, I disagree with this study because of this methodology, and I don't think this is good. So I blah, 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 blah. You can't just say, well, you're wrong because that researcher says you're wrong, right? You have to engage on that level with that argument. That would be an appeal to authority otherwise. There is nothing wrong with citing like the FDA though and saying like, oh, well, the FDA says these are generally good treatments. So like, I think that in general, like I agree with them. That's not a fallacious appeal to authority. Don't let people call that like, oh, that's an appeal to authority. It's like, no, there are actual authorities on things. And you know, if you disagree that, if you really truly believe that appeal to authority is a fallacious argument, then why is it that you always seem to take your car to an auto mechanic? Why don't you just take him to a guy at Burger King, right? Why is it that you always seem to go to a hospital when you have medical problems? Why don't you just go to a massage therapist? Why, right? Obviously, we function in life as though different people have authority in different domains. That's how everybody functions in life, and to pretend otherwise is silly, right?
Medicines.
Yes, but do you also agree that by taking that approach, you're basically making it so that your argument can't be argued against? I'm not making an appeal to authority.
No,
I'm not making an appeal to authority. If I could just finish really quickly. I'm not making an appeal to authority. An appeal to authority would be if I was appealing to someone who's an authority figure in a different area. Oh. Like if I were like, well,
oh my God, you might have heard the Destiny explanation on this one before. Hold on, maybe he'll give them both. I shouldn't have interrupted him. My bad.
Brad Pitt says this is good. That would be an appeal to authority. The FDA is an authority when it comes to approving medication, and they've already approved the puberty blockers. They've been used since the 80s on cis kids. This idea that this is like some experimental drug or whatever is just, it's not true. What's happening here is just kids suffer from gender dysphoria. It's been happening forever, and it's going to continue to happen, and this is what's been shown to better their mental health. That's what I want to do. I don't want trans people to suffer, and I want to make society better.
So let's talk about whether this actually helps people or not. First, just so the audience are aware, the FDA have approved drugs that have killed tens of thousands of people and then retracted them and tried to cover up their release, like Vioxx.
You keep trying to poke holes in what I've said without providing counter.
I'm telling the audience,
Okay.
just so you know, the FDA have made mistakes before, and you can look into it. Vioxx. You wanted some counter evidence. The studies for I can't even pronounce it. He's got a Polish last name. Wojniak 2016 was a study of young girls who were treated with triptorelin, which is one of the GnRHs, which is generally used to block puberty. And it showed that with a control group, their substantial amount of IQ points went down by 7 points.
Did they attribute that specifically to the puberty blockers?
Compared to a control group, this is what their conclusion was in the study. That
what was the medication
children
called?
took the IQ tests, triptorelin, which is one of the Lupron and triptorelin are the two main in the GnRHs.
Right. Okay, yeah. I just want to
puberty
make
in kids. And I mean, Lupron, there's a ton of studies on the negative effect it's had on adults, particularly grown men who have prostate cancer and have had to take it. They get loss of sexual function. Obviously, testosterone produces red blood cells, so they get anemia, they get reduced hemoglobin, loss of muscle tissue, fatigue, mood changes.
I think that you're kind of getting off.
Metabolic syndrome, bloating, cognitive issues.
Lauren, no one's disputing.
You're saying I'm getting off topic, but
no, because no one's
these are some of the.
I know, but no one's disputing that medication has risks. We already acknowledge that. Like I already said, I mean, every time you take a Tylenol, like too much of that shit can kill you with fatal liver problems. Like, all medication has potential risks. The IQ thing, like IQ can change, especially when people are younger. I would have to see that study and know if it was actually directly like correlated to puberty blockers at all. When it comes to the other claims though about like I said, lower bone density and whatnot, these are negligible.
An 8 IQ deficit is extreme. That's extreme.
I would have to.
8 IQ is pretty big. I want to say 15 is a standard deviation. Am I wrong? Or is it less than that? Is 10 a standard deviation for IQ? Is it 15? So 7 or 8 IQ, like, you guys can shit on IQ all you want if you follow certain people and you get mad about it, but like a loss of 7 IQ is a really, really, really big deal to most people. Now, to me, if I lose 7 IQ, I'm 180, okay? So it's not a big deal, but for you guys, okay? 7 IQ, that's a lot compared to a control group. That is incredibly, like, concerning. Like, if you have a relatively unintelligent person, 7 IQ could be the difference between like functioning human being and mentally retarded. Like that's a pretty big. That's a big one. Don't hand wave that. Okay. Now that being said, I don't know if that study legit. The 7 IQ difference that's pretty significant. I would be surprised if that was the case. We could look this up later. I don't want to do like a study review. I don't want to like start digging into all that, but yeah.
Take a look at that study at some time. I'd be happy to look at it sometime.
Yeah.
to see the IQ thing. But you know what? Again, we need to talk about whether or not the benefits outweigh the negatives. And I think let's go ahead and say let's go ahead and even say, okay, fine, it lowers your IQ, whatever. What's better, to have a little bit of a lower IQ?
Oh, that's a good point that he was about to bring up. I don't want to like dig into every study on stream because we don't have the time for it. Commentary. So this is in 2017. Cognitive, emotional, and psychosocial functioning of girls treated with pharmacological puberty blockage for idiopathic central precocious puberty. Is this a Polish? This must be Polish because there's these letters next to each other. Oh, see, and if he was familiar with this, so this is the sneaky one as well. So, Lauren, so you point out the weakness of some of Hunter's studies. So I don't know if you're being intentionally dishonest here or if you're just memeing hard, but we attacked Hunter's meta-analysis earlier or systematic review earlier by saying some of the studies within this systematic review had a very low sample size, okay? But this study is sample size n equals 30, which now he doesn't know this study, but if he did, he could say, well, hold on, why are your low sample size studies relevant? The 8-point gap is not statistically significant, but as the authors point out, this may be a functional small number. So we would need more to test for this as well. The authors contend that despite the small number of participants, the results can probably be relied on to indicate that if GnRHs do cause a decline in IQ, this decline will be under one standard deviation, which represents a boundary of what is a clinically interesting difference. Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that. I would agree with this statement. The contention that a decline only becomes clinically interesting if it is at least one standard deviation is unconvincing. I would agree with that statement. Any findings that indicate that gene or cause a decline, even a modest decline in IQ, are likely to be of considerable interest to patients and their parents. It's a factor that may very well want to consider in deciding whether or not to take the drug. In this respect, it can be noted that 2 of the treated girls had been held back a year at school. Given their advanced physical maturity, children with precocious puberty may find it particularly uncomfortable to be put in a class where they are a year older than their classmates. I wonder if this is something, if this changes over time as well. I wonder if there are other things. I'm sorry, I don't want to hold this up doing this whole read, but I wonder how many years they tracked those. Findings of can be compared with those of a 2001 study in which 25 children treated for early puberty with triptorelin acetate, I think, were tested with the short of the intelligence for children. In this longitudinal study, children took the IQ test before treatment, and again after 2 years of treatment. It was found that the IQ dropped 7 points from 100 to 97. With 25 treated participants, the 7-point drop was significant. In both studies, the difference in the performance element of the test was greater than in the verbal element. The similarities between the findings of these 2 studies strengthen their reliability, increase possible unit may have an adverse impact on cognitive function in children. It's actually more important for further research to be carried out. Oh, so this is 2 years after. It would be interesting, say, it would be interesting to see if this difference is like years and years and years later. But okay.
You and not fucking kill yourself, not have depression, live a better quality of life versus what? I want to know what your solution is to this, because you're kind of against what is sort of accepted as the treatment right now. So what is your solution?
What is my solution? Well, okay, let me ask you, what do you think is the better outcome for a child? To have gender dysphoria and to struggle with this issue that we both know causes mass amounts of psychological, mental, sociological crises in people. It's tragic. It is not a fun thing. And
it's tragic,
when I've spoken to transgender people, I know, it's a hard thing for them. And I will admit, I think this is something that conservatives don't acknowledge enough, that this is a genuine struggle. People don't choose this. It's not something, they didn't choose to not want to be in the right body, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if they're dealing with gender dysphoria, then yeah, in this context for sure.
Not great. So I think the best solution, first of all, is that people not have gender dysphoria in the first place. Can we agree there?
I mean, yeah, but how would you go about doing that?
Okay, well, there is an 88% desistance rate in gender dysphoric boys. And that means they think that they have gender dysphoria, and then they decide later on that they don't actually have it.
Wait, hold on, what?
Dysphoric boys. There is an 88% desistance rate in gender dysphoric boys. And that means they think that they have gender dysphoria, and then they decide later on that they don't actually have it. They desist. And that is an amazing result. Usually they go on to become gay men. That's usually what they go on to be. I actually was just gay. I wasn't a woman. And the problem here with puberty blockers is the main deciding point for children when they desist, that has been studied, is puberty. So you are reducing the chance of someone not having to struggle.
Okay, so real quick, just because this gets brought up all the time, that 88% desistance rate, that's not among people that take puberty blockers. It's not, or that's not like, because I don't know if she's citing it this way or if they're going to get into this. Some people try to make it sound like, 88% of people regret, doing this, blah, 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 blah. This is like 88% of people that even begin to question, eventually like go back. And I think it's even higher than that. It's like in the 90s, I think, or I've seen different numbers on this. But like of all the people that question whether they're trans, like the vast, vast, vast majority of them end up like saying like, okay, no, I'm not, or whatever. But that's not the percentage of people that actually go through and take puberty blockers and like, 90% of them regret it and go back or whatever.
With gender dysphoria for the rest of their life by not allowing them to go through puberty and have this 88% chance of desistance, which is from the, I can send you the study on this.
Yeah.
Also, to be clear, puberty blockers delay puberty. They don't stop it. They don't block it forever, right? They're not supposed to at least.
Send you the studies that show. Okay. So here's the 88% desistant rate in young boys. And then here's the Sage, this is from Sage Journal. This shows adolescents with persisting gender dysphoria persisters and those in whom gender dysphoria remitted, desisters, indicated that they considered the period between 10 and 13 years of age to be crucial.
Okay, can I cut in here really quickly?
They became increasingly aware of the persistence or desistance of their childhood gender dysphoria.
I already know what the issue is with this right here, and this is a problem with a lot of this.
Yep.
It's actually kind of interesting because you just started talking about the methodology. Studies like this follow the referral rate. So, of course, you're going to see a larger decrease of people who are referred because that's the point of going to a clinic, right? You're referred there to go, hey, let's get checked out and see if this is anything to worry about or not. So, of course, you're going to see a larger decrease if you just look at who's referred to clinics. It says right at the beginning, this study reports follow-up data on the largest sample of boys clinic referred. So if you actually look at once people are, now this is clinic referred for gender dysphoria. So again, that could mean that, they thought they might have gender dysphoria, so they were referred to the clinic. When you actually look at it in a way that when you control for kids who actually are confirmed gender dysphoria, the regret or the detransition rate is only around like 13%. And out of that, the vast reason for that is because external factors like pressure from the family, school environments, vulnerability to violence and whatnot, which again plays into the fact that this is a social issue that we need to be more accepting of trans people if we want to actually help them. Lastly, you talk about kids like growing out of stuff, right? Well, that supports. Wait, hold on. I just really quickly want to say this, and then I'll let you respond. When you talk about kids growing out of stuff, that supports my point. Puberty blockers, this is why they're relatively safe and reversible for the most part, right? It's so that you can put kids on puberty blockers to make sure that they can decide, am I trans? Am I not? Do I want to pursue treatment as I get older, or do I not? Because the risk of going through the wrong puberty greatly raises their chance of killing themselves later on down the line.
Okay.
So if you're worried about them detransitioning or changing their mind, that would support puberty blockers, right? Because they're reversible.
Okay, if you are claiming that this study is flawed because it uses referrals, that's almost every single study regarding transgenderism.
I can send you a study that didn't. That actually uses
it.
I can literally send you a study that
uses
didn't.
referrals. And detransitioning is not desistance. They're different things. Almost every single study, the best evidence that's out there, and you can look into this, people watching this can look into this, shows a desistance rate of at least above 50%, which means by continuing kids and by not letting them go through natural puberty, there's at least tons of kids that did not have to go through drugs for the rest of their life, that did not have to deal with
what do you mean drugs for the rest of your life?
Gender dysphoria. Well,
what do you mean? Kids can go on puberty blockers, give themselves a second to figure it out. If they decide, hey, I don't think I'm actually trans, I'm okay. They go off the puberty blockers and continue their puberty.
When the point of deciding that you are transgender or not is generally when you go through puberty and you stop that, and instead you put a kid on drugs that prevents them from getting to that point where people generally decide, does that not?
That's not true. It's not.
You're either going in one direction or the other. You're either leaning your kid towards desistance or you're leaning them towards a full-on transition. And
what would be better?
To put someone on drugs
what would be better?
Leaning them towards a full-on transition.
If your child is exhibiting signs,
someone not struggle with gender dysphoria in the first place.
Well, then your position is completely unattainable and unrealistic. I don't this is like if I came up to you and said, hey, I really support people with OCD, anxiety, and depression. OCD is something I actually struggled with growing up. That's really tough, man. It sucks. But I don't really support giving people, antidepressants or any of the medication that helps. Now, the ideal situation would be just don't have anxiety. This is unrealistic. Come on, this isn't how we solve problems.
Well, I'm sorry, Hunter, but there are not people, I have ADHD. I was born with it. My dad had it. I am medicated for it. I personally waited until I was out of high school. It takes at least a 6-month process to get the drugs for it because they are serious and have impact.
Literally, the APA handbook for trans people is a minimum of 6 months of consistent gender dysphoria, right?
Hunter, if I had an option to desist,
why are they?
Or if it was a possibility
They're doing the
that
thing.
I could desist from having ADHD.
Is he going to start saying, Lauren?
Holy shit. That would be amazing, but that's not.
But we're not talking about that. Again, when we look at
comparing apples and oranges.
No, I'm not. When we look at the studies,
ADHD.
When we look at the studies of people who have gender dysphoria, when we know that they're confirmed gender dysphoric, the majority of them go on to transition. I can send you other studies too of different.
No, the majority of kids go on to desist.
No, this is based on referral rates again, which is completely flawed.
We have mass amounts of people desisting.
That's not what that could mean, that they were struggling with gender dysphoria and chose not to. You know, some of the like regret rate or desistance rate or whatever is also because of social stigma. So
Okay,
like, I mean,
so,
this doesn't make any sense. What you're saying right now is that it'd be better not to be gender dysphoric. So let's say, you know, your kid is showing some like strong signs of gender
and
incongruence.
I'm saying that
What would you really
blockers
just look them in the eye and be
prevent
like,
kids
yeah,
from
you
getting
should
to
not
that point
have
of
gender
desistance?
dysphoria? I mean, this is a ridiculous argument.
No, that's not what I'm saying. If someone continues on and they get past this point and they don't desist after puberty, which is very likely that they will, then we have to talk about other potential approaches. And I don't actually think, based on the very poor research that I've looked into, I don't think that transitioning medically actually helps in the way that you're suggesting it does.
Really? Is it purely
Yes.
because you were not satisfied with some of the sample sizes of the studies?
Well, no. Well, first of all, yes, there are some low sample size studies that show there is a minor correlation with positive life outcome, which
There's
still,
not even any studies
even
that
if we
show
were
a
just-
negative one, though.
Yeah.
There's not even any.
No, the best studies we have show no cause at all. So why would we put children on drugs with very poor research when the best studies show us it has absolutely no impact
Your
at all?
core, your
That if you knew that the correct answer is, that's why we continue to put people on it, is to try researching. How do you, because his correct answer is like, okay, well, Lauren, how do you suggest we continue the research? Like, this is how the research works. Like, you approve it, limited use, some people try it, and then you follow the study, or you follow the effects, right? Like, the only way you could do these longitudinal studies is to like prescribe medications and see how they work out, right? Like, that's how it works. Unless you're like clinically like trialing like different drugs or whatever, I guess. But like that, like more and more data will come from larger and larger sets, right?
You're correlating things that aren't correlated. You're equivocating things here. First of all, you're talking about a poor methodology of a study on general treatment like surgery and hormone therapy for adults, and you're comparing that to puberty blockers. Puberty blockers have been researched and studied. Like I said, they're confirmed by the FDA. They've been used for cis kids for decades. These are two different
Yes,
things that you're talking about right
with extreme risks.
now. No,
okay,
not with
let's see.
extreme
Okay.
risks. Negligible risks that always are outweighed by the benefits. To have a better quality of life is a much better benefit to trade for a potential risk of like slightly
Okay, so
lower bone density.
let's talk about whether there is a benefit to life then. Would you agree that when there are bad studies around whether medical transition works and good studies around whether medical transition works, we should look at the good studies?
Sure.
Have you heard of Brandstrom and Pachenkas?
I've not. Is this the Swedish one?
It is a Swedish study, and just so the audience are aware, we tend to like Scandinavian studies. They tend to have the best data sets because people there have very little freedom. They keep tabs on all the citizens. They do annual consensus forums. They've got data on every person, which obviously is terrible for freedom, but it is excellent for data collection. So this is why people tend to like Scandinavian and Swedish studies over
This might be true, but I've never heard this particular claim in my life. This sounds like something that came from a Steven Crowder video, but this might be the case. But
our 25 sample size university studies in America and Canada and so on. So Brandstrom and Pachenkas 2019. Best study ever seen on gender transitioning medically. And this is both a combination of hormones, this is a combination of sex reassignment surgery. It's just the idea of trying to transition physically through medical process
What
to
did the study
other
find?
sex. The study found that there was the same suicide rate, same anxiety rate, and same hospitalization rate with one of the biggest sample sizes we have ever done, 2,600
Could you send me
transgender
that
people
study
with
just 'cause I'm
a
curious?
control group.
How many?
Yeah.
is this the Ben Shapiro one? I should remember the name to this because it gets brought up and we end up looking it up so much. But is this the one that Ben Shapiro cites all the time where he tries to say that like, oh look, this proves that there was no difference whatsoever? Okay, this study gets cited by conservatives so often that I think the researcher, I think herself, I think it was a woman, like actually came onto Reddit during an AMA and said, hey, people try to say that this study argues like against the idea that like getting treatments for trans people is good, but that's not what this study was analyzing. Like, I don't know why it's cited so often by conservatives or whatever, because I think this all comes from, there was some debate or some college speech that Ben Shapiro gave where he cited this study. Remind me after this video and we'll go look for that. We should probably know the name of this offhand and know the researcher offhand because like it just gets cited so incredibly often by conservatives. It's like, look, this is the proof that none of this stuff actually, pretty sure Destiny is discussing the wrong study. I think he's thinking of the suicide study. Yes, the one that I'm talking about has to do with suicidality. Oh, maybe this isn't the one that you're talking about then. This might be a different one. Fuck me. I didn't want to bring this dumbass fucking bus up. Sorry.
Absolutely.
How many trans people? 28?
2,600.
Oh, wow, 2,600. Shit. Okay. Yeah, if you could send that in to me, I'd be great.
Phenomenal sample size. Yeah.
So, I mean, you have a study that says, like, you know, there might be negligible differences, and there are other studies that says it really, you know, helps. So, again, if this is kind of if this is a reversible thing.
When the data improves and shows that it's actually going in the other direction, you got to start asking yourself some questions. When all the poor data that's from biased sources is showing, oh yeah, it's all good, and then we have a better study that comes out and shows actually there's no effect,
Did you
got to
send it to me?
start asking some questions. Yeah, let me get that.
Is it the Sage one?
Just opening it here.
I can also send you this. Speaking of 2,600.
Uh-oh.
Wait, is this from Nature?
Nature.
Okay, just open.
Let me see. No, this is a different one. Yeah, I mean, I can give you a cohort here, which is of 2,600 trans individuals also. They're able to draw some pretty significant conclusions about the effects of standard care. Hormone treatment seems to be safe with few side effects. The most common complaints from people are lower.
Oh, did you just... Okay, can you send that to me?
Yeah, sure. This one comes from Nature.
Yep.
And then can you send me yours?
Yep. Hey guys, welcome to the Hunter and I Reading Through Studies stream. Welcome.
Welcome to the library where we quietly are just reading along. Hello, hi. Hold on, wait.
No yelling in the library. Everybody quiet.
I'm gonna try to like speed read through the abstract here, so if you just give me a second.
The pressure's on. Who's gonna read the other study first? If he was a real big brain, what he would have done is he would have Googled the name of the study in quotes, and then he would have done Reddit response and seen if there was a response thread saying why the study was bullshit. If he wanted to be a real big brain debate winner on the fly.
I mean, it looks like what this one study may have found is that there like wasn't that much of a difference. So again, I feel like we could literally make the same argument. What's better? A potential to have a better quality of life, which I would be happy, by the way, to send you this right here. Here's one from.
Wait, what? Does anybody have a link to the?
Oh shit! Isn't a study? It's a.
That's a follow-up, and also yours, by the way, says right here that this was. The study used neither a prospective cohort design nor a randomized control trial design. The conclusion that the longitudinal association between gender-affirming surgery and lower use of mental health treatment lends support to the decision to provide gender-affirming surgeries to transgender individuals who seek them is too strong. Finally, although the percentage of individuals...
No, Hunter, you're wrong. The original didn't, but the correction did. So there was a correction to this article or to this study which came out and said, actually, we made a mistake. There is absolutely no difference. Gender-affirming surgery has no impact.
Okay, so I mean,
this is the question: is when the best study says it has no impact, why would we put kids on? Why would we start people in transition processes that cost tons of money? That in some cases, people have died from gender transition surgery. People have literally gotten necrosis from it, and I know these are different things, hormones and gender-affirming surgery, but even with hormones, like you said, there's risk to every medicine. There's risk to anything you can take, whether it be IQ points, lowered bone density, cognitive issues like Lupron is shown in adults. Why would we give people a medicine that the only data we have is either good data saying it has no impact or bad data saying it has very low impact?
Because this one data point you brought me said there was like not really much of a difference.
There's no objective gains. There's no objective
That's not true.
here.
There are countless other studies, including one I just sent you from Pediatrics, official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, that found a pretty strong association between access to pubertal suppression and suicidality. there's a significant inverse association between treatment with pubertal suppression during adolescence and lifetime suicidal ideation among transgender adults who ever wanted this treatment. These results align with past literature suggesting that pubertal suppression for transgender adolescents who want this treatment is associated with favorable mental health outcomes. So here's my real problem here, Lauren, is that there's a massive body of evidence on this subject. You can find some studies here and there that might say that didn't really make that much of a change. But again, you have to look at the overall positives and the overall benefits, right? And it seems that the positives here are a lower chance of suicide, and furthermore, a practical effect here of just pausing.
Wait. Okay, wait. No. Whoa. Now what you're showing is there's a massive body of really terribly done evidence that doesn't really show anything.
I sent you a meta-analysis. I sent you a systematic review, and that was only a couple of them. I can send you more. I didn't think that we were going to be going back and forth doing like the debate, bro, picking apart.
Well, that's because I'm not just going to believe everything you tell me about a study, because unfortunately I was just in a debate with Xander Hall where he debunked a study I told him, and it was the entirely wrong study, because it seems like a lot of guys
I'm familiar with what study
documents.
That was. I'm familiar with.
A lot of people just use documents and haven't actually read the studies. They don't know what the actual data analysis
study that
was.
you sent, hold on, the study that you sent Xander Hall, the Swedish study, like, you didn't read that study either. I know you didn't, because the study didn't prove what you thought it proved. Sometimes people don't read studies. Sometimes it gets silly. Whatever.
The
main issue
brought out the personal attack.
The main issue that I have here.
No,
the main issue.
We're not all reading the studies.
The main issue that I have here is that there is enough evidence to suggest that puberty blockers are largely safe and lower the chance of suicide later on down the line. Hold on, and furthermore, hold on, wait.
Provided me is terrible evidence, and the best evidence that we have discussed, Brandstrom and Pachenkis, said there was no effect. So this study right now, the one you just sent me, don't pivot from this, because you just threw the study at me and you're not letting me ask questions about it, which is not fair.
Okay, go ahead, ask questions.
Pubertal suppression for transgender youth and risk of suicide ideation. What was the sample size in this study? Like, these are important things. What was the sample size? You know?
And then 2.5% received pubertal suppression. Variables. Let's see. Using a cross-sectional survey of 20... Holy shit, am I reading that number correctly? 20,619 transgender adults. Aged 18 to 36-year-old. Okay, yeah, I mean, when it comes to... 20,000.
You're telling me they used a sample size of 20,000?
When it comes to social
survey,
sciences,
that's not unbelievable.
You have to work with what you have. What you're doing is really just trying to poke holes here. And my problem is that you say that you care about transgender people, and I genuinely do believe that, but it kind of comes across as a virtue signal when you say you care about trans people, but then you're against the treatment for trans people. And then you're desperately like trying to like grab these like one-off studies that kind of might suggest that like there's not actually that much of improvement or whatever to try and argue against this.
I don't know rhetorically like where the audience stands on the argument or whatever, but like if we're bringing up a ton of studies that are like, oh, sample size 20, sample size blah, 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 and then somebody wants to wheel out like, oh, well, you know, I have a sample size like n equals, what was the one that she was talking about? Like 2,700 or 3,600 or whatever. That's a big boy. That's a big boy number. And you need to be ready to contend with that. I think you need to be like familiar with this particular study, especially when we're talking about like trans issues. That's a big study. And it probably behooves you to be familiar with the material, because something like that is definitely going to get brought up if you're having a debate over these issues. Absolutely.
It seems like you have an underlying agenda a little bit.
Hunter, just because you have a lot of bad studies with bad data doesn't make anything you say true.
Not all of them are bad studies. When it comes to social...
No, they are. The one you just brought up was an online survey. And
when it comes to social... Hold on. When it comes to social sciences, you have to work with what you have here.
Of course.
So yes, of course, the way you're going to determine if their health is better is by a survey. A sample size of 20,000.
Okay, listen, Hunter, you're poisoning the well here by saying I'm just virtue signaling when I ask really genuine questions about the fact that these studies don't seem to prove anything based on the researchers' analysis of them as well. Most of the studies you've sent me, the researchers have said themselves it's very low quality data.
Because we have to work with what we have.
Rarely skews right. And actually, you know what, Hunter, this is something I really agree with you on. I think there is a severe problem with the research around transgender issues, and gender dysphoric issues. And most researchers agree with this. There are a lot of people out here, like I was just reading a Mike article about doctors treating trans youth that are grappling with uncertainty.
Let me get a water real quick. Hold on one second.
And lack of training. They don't know when they should prescribe something or not prescribe something.
Sure. This is sort of a subset of the underlying issue though here, right? Like the problem that I have really is that people are suffering right now. People are dealing with gender dysphoria right now, and so are kids. And your solution seems to be very sort of like, you know, kind of like blasé, sort of like, well, let's just wait till sometime data comes along that might suggest, like, we have studies, we have data. The FDA has approved puberty blockers for cis kids since the 80s. This seems to be working based on the huge study I just gave you with over 20,000.
The FDA approved Vioxx, which killed 60,000 people.
So
and this is why
what?
when people say, oh, the social sciences have bad data, I guess that's okay. No, it's not okay. And here's the biggest
issue. It's not okay,
so
and it's not just bad data.
Back to processes, because it's clear that we don't understand a lot of this, okay? There was a name a long time ago that was given, there was a name given to this. I think it was called, is it called scientism? I'm using this more colloquially, but so scientism is the promotion of science as the best or only objective means by which society should determine normative and epistemological values. So the idea that science can tell us where morals or where truth come from. Some people fall into this issue. I guess it's like a subset of this kind of like scientism. I think a lot of the like old school kind of atheists like fell out of this. People get this like weird obsession with science where they think that like science gives 100% all the answers on every subject or whatever. That's not how science works. Like, I'm pretty sure that like even what I learned in school, like the concept of, if there's a big physics guy in here, you can call me out if I'm wrong. But like even in school, remember how we learned like problem, hypothesis, experiment results, problem, experiment results, conclusion, retest, theory and law. Even that ending thing of like theory and law, I don't think we make scientific laws anymore. I think we've gotten away from even doing that. Where we're like, oh, this is the new law of science or whatever. This is our new law of physics, like blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't think we even use that terminology anymore. Science is like an ever constantly changing body of information that updates itself as time goes on and we do more research and investigation. If you ever come out and you bring this hard-hitting, like, this is like science says this particular thing and it's 100% right, you're always setting yourself up to get bodied because that's not how science works. The reason why I bring this up, so like the FDA or like any body is not going to be a 100% perfect body, okay? You know, the Lancet is one of the most prestigious medical journals of all time. And that's the journal that published the one study so long ago that vaccines might cause autism, right? Just recently, the Lancet had a huge blunder where they published that the killing study on hydroxychloroquine, the largest analysis ever using the biggest data set we've ever looked at. And that study, they couldn't verify. They couldn't verify any of the data sets on that, and they had to pull that study. It was a huge that whether that data set even exists is like questionable. Yeah, so I bring this up because like it's okay to say like, yeah, the FDA has gotten some things wrong. Of course, any body will, any body, like a body of any organization, any institution will, but that's not a reason to just hand wave all of it, right? That's not a reason to just say like, oh, it's all garbage. You know, they've made a mistake before. Okay, well, like, you know, the FDA has made mistakes before, but the FDA has also gotten some things right. I think that America was like one of the only countries that didn't approve. There was a name of some drug that was prescribed to women that ended up like making their kids be born with like 8 hands or some shit. Well, I always forget the name of this drug, but I'm pretty sure the FDA was one of the only bodies. Is it thalidomide? Thalidomide? I can never pronounce this because I've never heard it pronounced before. But yeah, this is like a big one that like, I think in the US this was never approved, but it was approved across, I think almost all of Europe. And I think it ended up used for the treatment of nausea in pregnant women. But it became apparent in the 60s that thalidomide treatment resulted in severe birth defects in thousands of children. But yeah, not everybody gets everything right all the time. You need to understand that. That's really important to understand.
the Vioxx case, there was a whistleblower, there was a doctor who tried to talk about this. He kept trying to tell people, there are serious issues with this, we need to talk about this, and he kept getting covered up and muffled by the FDA and other organizations. And I think one of the big issues we have with gathering data on how to help transgender people best and what the best approaches are is people are not allowed to do research with the openness they would like to. If
No,
you come
this
out
is a
with
level of
studies that
conspiracism I'm not
question
planning on. No, this is a level of
What do
conspiracism.
you mean a level of conspiracism?
This
What do you
is
mean?
you're saying that now the reason that the data tends to side with my position is because there's some kind of this LGBT conspiracy that they're not allowed to share
When did I
studies.
say
Hold on. What is this?
Thalidomide.
Thalidomide.
Brand.
Thank you. Thalidomide.
that? Hunter.
That's
Hunter,
what
when did I say
you were
that?
just getting at.
Can I bring Lauren on stream? If she wants to come on stream, she has to message me on Instagram. She has the ability to do that if she wants to come on.
One of the most common studies cited by conservatives, including you in the Xander Hall debate, was the Swedish study. People are not being shushed or like hushed. I mean, you just sent me this massive study that you claimed proved your point. Like, who's being silenced for coming out with data that contradicts the trans ideology or whatever?
Hunter.
Hunter.
It is a fact that 1 in 4 social psychologists will reject someone that they think has socially conservative views from getting a grant application. It is a fact that 1 in 3 hiring divisions will reject people they think might have conservative views in life from going into social sciences divisions. We know this. There is very good data on discrimination against people with more conservative politics, which do tend to be politics that question affirmation surgery, that question hormone blockers. Why would anyone in their right mind trying to forward their academic career do studies or come out with data that suggests that the popular narrative around transgenderism might not be the right approach?
Yeah, see, this is what I mean, the popular narrative or whatever. Like, what do you mean when you say the narrative? What does that mean?
What do I mean when I say
What's
the narrative?
the transgender narrative?
As you have said, the FDA have approved hormone blockers. This is becoming it's a very sad thing. It's unfortunate that we are having this issue politicized right now. And I think it's horrible when it's politicized from either side. I don't want the sciences or medicine politicized, whether it be from a right-wing conservative Christian view or from a progressive view, but we do have...
I think this is also another kind of this is also another symptom of the scientism ideology. And I think different people will adopt scientism when they think, I guess when it suits their argument or just different, it kind of depends. This idea that science can be free of politics is just, it's impossible. Any time, let's wheel out some philosophy. So normativity will precede any question about research. So before I can do any amount of research, right? Before I can do any type of investigation, I have to make a claim on where I want to research, on what type of investigation I want to do, right? Some level of normativity or like moral questioning is going to come before any type of scientific investigation. Science is not something that works as like an amorphous blob in all areas of our life. Somebody has to make a decision to do that research first. Just on that foundation alone, there's going to be some political whatever in terms of who makes what decisions, in terms of where the research goes. Now, to further politicize things, there's also going to be fights over how can I get funding for my research? Will my university support my research? Blah, 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 blah. So don't ever try to say like science isn't political ever. To some extent, all science can be political. Literally all science can be political to some extent. But that's not a reason to hand wave it. But it's good to be aware of these issues and know of them so that you don't like have a good response to them. Like that's just part of the process, right? Hold on, how much longer is this debate? It says 30 minutes. I don't know if it's 30 more minutes of him talking to you, but
have politicized medicine right now. Take, for example, when I changed my gender in Ontario. When I went into the doctor's office and said, I am a man, the doctor told me, well, I guess I can't deny your lived experience, because she wasn't about to sit there and argue with me about it. There was absolutely no medicine involved.
I'm not really
there was no actual science involved.
I remember the video. I remember
ridiculous.
That. It was. I remember that.
Ridiculous.
I remember that little stunt. I do remember it. But I think that's kind of overall getting off subject here.
No,
I think
it's
that
not.
if we're
It's
talking,
very on subject.
we're not really talking about like this transgender narrative here. What you've basically told me is that because sometimes people with conservative views have a harder time, like, I don't know, getting grants or whatever, that means that these studies are all biased in favor of trans people. I mean, excuse me,
saying
but
we're
like
not
this is
getting good
obviously
research. We're
getting
not
into
getting
levels
good
of
research.
conspiracism.
It's not a conspiracy. There are people that have been fired from Dr. Makareth, fired from the NHS. Lisa Littman, who got in trouble with her university. I admit her study wasn't very good, but that wasn't why she got in trouble. She got in trouble for being against the popular narrative.
So, man, you got to be really careful when you get into somebody's wheelhouse. So you know that somebody like Lauren Southern is going to spend her whole life talking about like how corrupt the establishment, blah, 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 blah. You have to be, I wouldn't be ready for this conversation in terms of like, oh, we're going to talk about like every person that's been fired because of some blah, 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 blah. 90% of the time, usually, this is just, in my personal experience, maybe it's not true all the time, 90% of the time somebody brings up like that person was fired just because they published this thing or whatever. When you actually go and you read into it, there was actually like way more shit going on. It's pretty rare that like somebody got fired for like completely randomly no reason or some SJW bullshit agenda. Now, that's not to say that that never happens. For instance, that is stupid and clueless as I believe this guy is. The Brett Weinstein, like that guy's original firing and everything over the scope was ridiculous. That whole circumstance was stupid. But generally speaking, it seems like most cases there's usually something else going on too. But
you can't say
Sure,
it's
you know, I
conspiracy
think
when
I
we
think
know
that we
this is
could.
happening. You can't say it's conspiracy that. Would you agree at least?
I would be
that
willing to have
there
a-
is discrimination against conservatives in academia.
I would definitely be willing to say. I will
prove this.
definitely agree with you in that data should not be politicized. If we want more people who have conservative beliefs that want to do some data on this, fine, let it happen. That's you know what? I'll go ahead and concede that for sure. Yeah, of course, I don't want data collection to be politicized, but right now, the data that we have available makes it pretty clear what the best route for people
Hunter,
with
it
gender
doesn't make
dysphoria
it-
is.
It does not make it very clear. It's all very poor research with a mixed match of results, some of which saying, the best of which saying...
You're saying it's the best of which only
there's
because
no
it's the study
impact.
that proves your point. Second of all, the multiple different studies I've sent you, some might have not had the most ideal sample size or whatever. That's not an argument. The body of research, the peer-reviewed
Hunter.
research, the meta-analyses, all point to the same
the
conclusion.
systemic-
And somehow, hold on, if I could just
systemic
finish here.
reviews that you think are
And somehow, Lauren,
meta-analyses.
you're telling me that you know more than all of these medical professionals.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying we don't know much. The studies are all bad, and therefore we shouldn't make guinea pigs out of children when all we have is poor research.
This is what I mean. Is like how are we making guinea pigs out of children? Was the FDA making guinea pigs out of children when they were giving them puberty blockers back in the 80s for precocious puberty?
Perhaps. It seems like there needs to be a lot of research in there because it's a 7-point IQ gap is huge. But seriously, even then, I would say abundance of caution. I'm not the one that's trying to radically change medicine here. I'm not the one that's trying to radically change. And here's the thing too, if there were better research, if there were better data saying absolutely this is what is helping people 100%, we know, probably would not be having this debate right now. But there isn't, Hunter.
But those are impossible standards that you're setting. There's never going to be any study that says anything is 100, nothing is ever going to be 100%.
No, I'm not asking, Hunter, I'm not asking for 100%. I'm asking for data that isn't sample sizes of 20 people from internet surveys. I'm asking for data that isn't self-described by the researchers as extremely low quality. And
I provided you the one with the 20,000 transgender people, but...
It does not have 20,000 transgender people, Hunter. It had 89. Like, I don't
Using a
know
cross-sectional
what you're
survey of
talking
20... Wait, hold on. I'm talking about this Pediatrics official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Am I looking at the wrong thing, or are we talking about something different?
Okay,
I think we might be talking about something different.
I'm 99% sure that did not have a sample size of 20,000.
You know what? If it doesn't, I mean, it's using a cross-sectional survey of 20.
Which all this tells me is you do not know the research.
Well, hold on. I'm not. Hold on, Lauren. I'm not a. Hold on. I'm not a sociologist.
Yeah, so the study had 89 people who actually went through puberty suppression.
I'm not a sociologist.
20,000 who did the survey online, 89 of which had actually even gone through puberty suppression.
Where are you seeing this?
So what a sample size. What a sample size.
I mean, you provided one study that was like some one-off study compared to the, again, body of research. Also, I'm not really sure.
You can't, I don't think you can hand wave away Lauren's like 3,000 sample size studies saying like this was a one-off study. I don't think it's fair to do that. I think you have to have a better argument there. I think you need something more there.
Hold on. I'm not even sure if you're looking at the same article that I'm looking at here. Second of all, I mean, this just seems really convenient for you to kind of write off the data, write off the facts that kind of are inconvenient for your beliefs. For what, though? Like, I don't understand how you can rectify, I guess.
Do you think she's arguing in good faith? I normally don't actually. So when I think of whether or not somebody is arguing a good or bad faith, I'm usually only trying to see if they're unwilling to follow some like deductive line of logic. If we lay out like some very clear like syllogism and they won't buy the conclusion, then I'm like, okay, you're not arguing a good faith. But like we haven't gotten to that point yet in this conversation. I never try to figure out like, oh, are they in good faith or not? If they haven't like done any like clear like violation of logic or something, if they're like doing some crazy shit, then yeah. But like, yeah, I don't think we've hit a point yet where these people seem like they're arguing in bad faith. It's more just like maybe people aren't 100% familiar with the material, or somebody came more prepared than another person, or whatever.
Saying that you care about transgender people, but then like opposing what seems to work. You can complain about the sample sizes or all you want. I've already explained the complications there when it comes to social sciences. At the best thing you could provide me was a study that said like the difference was like negligible. Okay, so what's the bit like possibly having a better quality of life,
Hunter,
not committing suicide.
You haven't even read the study you just cited. You thought 20,000 transgender people were in it. You just admitted you're not a sociologist, so why are you defending the data?
Are you?
No, I'm not.
So then what does that have to, that has no relevance here.
Heck of a lot of bad studies that you haven't read and I haven't read fully.
Lauren, we've both been sent. Hold on, we've both. Come on, this is. You know that this is uncharitable. You're being Hold on, if I could just finish really quickly here. You're being uncharitable. We were both sent. We've both been sending studies back and forth. Okay. Second of all, I know because I watched the Xander Hall debate when you have cited studies before that you yourself haven't read either. Let's not get so
dumb of me. Clearly,
let's not get
really dumb of me.
And it was also kind of a bad article, but that is also aside the point. So I mean, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to, I guess, rectify this. Your general conclusion then is that people should just stop having gender dysphoria. I'm not sure how that would be.
That's not my conclusion. Just because I oppose a bad solution with bad research doesn't mean I have all the solutions. And this is, once again, why I think we need more research into the subject. This is why I think we need to allow for more freedom of discussion around this subject. There are academics that are even left-wing that are saying, oh my goodness, we are terrified to talk about this issue honestly because we don't know if we're going to get fired. We don't know if we're going to be
This just sounds like a really convenient excuse for why there's not more data that supports the anti-transgender narrative.
Would you not agree? No. If it ends up being good, I hope you understand, when I went into researching this stuff, I was entirely open, and this is what I tried to do with debates. I sat here and I was like, okay, I have to be willing to accept that maybe Hunter is right. Maybe these therapies and treatments are absolutely the best option for children. Let's look at the research. Oh my goodness, this is the worst research I've ever seen in my life. And you know, I don't get how you can sit here and acknowledge that what I did in the Xander Hall debate, bringing up a study I had not read, did not know the details of, was stupid, and you've spent this whole debate doing the exact same thing.
No,
if you can
because
why are you speaking with such certainty on this issue?
Because it's not just, first of all, because it's not just one study. There are multiple different studies, and I'm going to keep on saying it. You can complain about the sample size all you want. You've provided me one study that showed like maybe there's not as much positive outcomes after all, which again doesn't even necessarily mean that like puberty blockers ultimately aren't the better move because there's also been studies that have shown the complete opposite, right? So I don't really think that you can just complain about the sample size. It sounds to me like you're kind of trying to have your cake and eat it too. You're able to get up here and talk about how tragic it is for trans people and how sad you are that they're struggling, but then you're also able to argue against what seems to be the treatment right now. I agree. I would like for there to be better data. I would like for there to be better, more in-depth studies. But you know what? Not less than ideal data proving one thing versus nothing is better still. And again, puberty blockers have been studied for years. So
Hunter.
No, it's not. It's not better. And you know, the Brandstrom and Pachenka study is not one-off study. There are a ton of studies on this that you haven't read, and it's literally the only study with a large national representative sample size and a proper control group. So why would we not go off of that study instead of a bunch of small, poorly done studies? And it's also not just sample sizes that I'm complaining about. It's the sampling method. It's the statistical bias. There are a heap of issues with the studies you have presented. Also, this is the thing. My general conclusion, I'm not saying don't help people with gender dysphoria. I'm not saying don't give them therapy, don't try to work things out, and when they're an adult they can make decisions that they like. I'm not saying that. I am saying that as long as we have really poor data on something, and the best data we have says it has no difference, no effect, and the thing may stop kids from desisting, which is the absolute most beneficial option for them to not have to deal with gender dysphoria at all, actually everything weighs on the side of it being more beneficial to not give children hormone treatment.
That's incorrect, because we can literally...
It's either no effect at all, or it stops them from desisting because they don't go through puberty. So everything leans on the side of being beneficial to not giving kids hormone blockers. And this doesn't mean I don't think adults should be able to do what they want. They should, but the data you're showing me, the only good data
blockers are
is
for
the one
kids,
saying
right?
There's no effect.
But puberty blockers are going to obviously be for kids, right? So like
Yes.
obviously puberty blockers are going to be, like when you say you're fine with people doing it when they're an adult, I mean, the problem is if you are gender dysphoric and you go through the wrong puberty, that one raises your chance of committing suicide later on in life, and it also is a practical thing. It makes it harder to pursue further transition. The puberty blocker seems like a pretty simple, middle of the ground approach. Let kids figure it out. You talk about like regretting it or desisting or whatever. That's as a result, obviously, of letting themselves have time to kind of think this through. That's what puberty blockers are for.
No, desisting isn't regretting it and detransitioning. Detransitioning and desisting are two different things.
I recognize that,
it's not
but puberty
regret,
blockers
it's
could
realizing, oh, I'm not actually transgender at all.
Yeah, which is exactly. Thank you. I'm glad you said that. That is exactly the point of puberty blockers. The actual point is so that kids can go on it who have gender dysphoria, and they are given time to decide. Maybe it will desist. If it does, great. That is ideal. Let's take them off the puberty blockers. Then they can go through regular puberty and continue living their regular ass life. Or we have people who have gender dysphoria, and the better studies have shown that the majority of them do go on to pursue treatment.
Hunter, you keep ignoring this point. No, the majority do not go on. 88% of young
No, that's using
boys
referrals,
desist.
and we already went over that.
And if puberty, what's wrong with referrals? That's what every single study uses.
Because if
you're
you
gonna defend
actually
all of your
control for
studies
when
as
the
being
children
fine,
have gender dysphoria, the majority of them go on to transition.
If you are blocking the thing that allows children to make the decision on whether they are transgender or not, you actually aren't allowing them to go on and grow up and make the decision. If puberty is the deciding factor for most children,
it's not
on whether
puberty.
they are
It's
trans
having
or
that.
not,
No, it's having that window of
No,
time.
it
It's
is
not
puberty.
specifically puberty. And if it
It
were
is specifically puberty.
no,
This
then
has
why
been
are
studied. I'll
kids
send
able to
you
go
the
through
study.
puberty blockers and give it time? That's the point of going on puberty blockers, is to give it time to
they-
decide if they are gender dysphoric or not.
Okay, what is, all right. Do you have any source showing that it is not puberty that is the main deciding point for kids when they decide they want to desist? Any source, because I have sources showing it is puberty. I don't know where you're getting this idea that it's not puberty.
Okay, I mean,
I
it's
really
probably
don't
it's
understand.
I would be really curious what her sources are there for proving that it is puberty. We experience gender so much before puberty. However, in terms of being trans, maybe that decision is ultimately or finally made at puberty. There are so many ways that I would challenge that. I don't know. I would be curious what her. I can't imagine that there's like a source one way or another stating something. That seems surprising to me.
probably a mix of, sure, fine. You know what? It probably is a mix of puberty and other factors as well.
Wait. No, okay, where is it a mix? I only have studies showing that it is puberty.
So you're
that is
saying
the
if they
main point.
don't go through puberty, then they will continue to be transgender?
Okay, let me read you this study.
Okay.
Adolescents with persisting gender dysphoria, persisters, and those in whom the gender dysphoria remitted, desisters, indicated they considered the period between 10 and 13, i.e. puberty, to be the most crucial point. They reported that this is the period they became increasingly aware.
Okay. It's been a long time. and I just might be totally wrong on this. Doesn't puberty last until you're like 18 or 19? Wait, do I just misremember? Did I develop late or something? Or I thought puberty is like some shit that starts when you're like 9 or 10, and then that lasts for like a better part of a decade. 10 to 13 is not puberty. But okay.
Of the persistence or desistance of their childhood gender dysphoria.
fuck,
So
I
this
didn't
is
mean to do
actually the deciding point for whether someone is transgender as well. And you are taking away that deciding point from people
No, that's
by giving them a hormone therapy that only has bad data supporting it, and the only good data shows it has no positive effect.
I would have to say that if you're really going to take that approach, I mean, like, I don't think that you can look at this here and then pick apart little data points that you're not too comfortable with, little like methodology things that you're not too happy with, and then try to...
These aren't little things, Hunter.
Okay, this kind of debate has never occurred in all of the debatosphere. I think it would be a lot of fun to do this at some point. But it has never happened. But the type of debate that honestly needs to happen at this point, what they should have said is, okay, you know what? We're having a disagreement on the data. Let's do this, okay? Let's set up a new debate, 2 or 3 weeks from now, okay? We have to give each other all of the studies that we plan to use 1 or 2 weeks beforehand, and let's actually, like, both of us will, you're essentially, both of you are doing a systematic analysis and arguing, and then arguing for who has, like the better studies or whatever. Because it's really hard to have a debate on the data when neither side is like fully familiar with the other side's data. I think it's like an impossible argument to have, right? We kind of did this with Nick Fuentes the second time. Yeah, sure. Didn't you kind of do this with Nuance, bro? Yes. Yeah, we did. We did it with Nuance, bro, round 2. We did it Nick Fuentes round 2. But that's, I think, when you really get into the meat. It's like, all right, well, okay, so you want to cite that thing and that thing? Okay, well, let's actually go through. Rather than like trying to read like abstracts on the fly and dig through and see if we can pick out like methodologies really quickly. Let's actually go through these now and see like who's correct or incorrect on this. And I think that's where like the real like the illuminating or the illumination happens in terms of like which side is more correct. Yeah. Okay, I think this one is like almost done. It says 15 minutes left, and apparently it cuts it off soon. So, all right.
They're not little things at all. 88% of young boys desisting, and the main point of children.
Do you feel like we're starting to go in a little bit of circles here?
Being puberty is not a small. Well, to accuse it of being a small thing is just ridiculous. You're forcing people to have gender dysphoria for longer.
No, we're not forcing people to have gender dysphoria at all. People, at the point of going on puberty blockers is to give them time to decide if it's going to desist or if they are going to pursue treatment. Now, during that time, during 10, 11, or 12, 13, yes, it can become more clear, but that is whether they're on puberty blockers or not. Again, I'm going to keep on saying this because it's the medical consensus. The point of puberty blockers is to pause puberty to give the child time to figure it out. If they desist, then they can go off the puberty blockers. Your assertion that if they go on puberty blockers, it's going to cause them to continue being trans is false. It's not true. And the entire
The
entire purpose of the medication is to put a pause there.
They're going to continue having dysphoria and not make a decision on whether to desist or not. And desistance is the most effective treatment we have for dysphoria right now.
We can't force people to desist.
Awesome.
Hold on, listen, I would agree. Of course, if people aren't transgender, if people are choose not, whatever, desistance, whatever, you can't make people desist. We have to work within what we're able to do, which is alleviating gender incongruence, gender dysphoria.
No, but if that alleviation causes the majority of people to continue to suffer, to continue to have dysphoria, and to desist later or not desist at all because they never went through puberty, that is a horrible solution, Hunter.
What is the next armor set I'm after, guys?
Basically, what I've learned from this conversation is the data doesn't have methodology that you like, so you can pretty much ignore it. You talk about caring about trans people, but then you kind of seem to be against what the medical consensus seems to suggest is the treatment.
It's not the medical consensus.
Do you have any closing thoughts here?
Yeah, if methodology doesn't matter, I can go and ask my Twitter followers if they think trans people will be cured if we just kill them, and if they all say yes, then that's a study, and you can't argue with it. Methodology matters. I did not say methodology doesn't matter at all. I never once said that. I said that when it comes to social sciences, there are complications there, and countless different studies, some being meta-analyses, some being long-term systematic reviews, some being cohorts and whatever, all finding this treatment to be effective for trans people right now. Seems to be the answer. But I appreciate you coming on here, Lauren. Really good. Can I make one last statement?
Sure, yeah, if you want to go ahead and close off. I'm not going to respond to anything here, though.
Okay, that's fine. I did enjoy talking to you. I enjoyed going through this stuff. I still have a lot of questions. I think that this is a highly complex disorder that requires a lot more data on it. I hope that people are able to research it more. Having a disorder doesn't make you worth less at all. It just means you're struggling with something, and we as a society need to accept that and work through it. And, I think that if most children are desisting, that is clearly the more positive route to lean to, rather than experimental hormone therapy, which has poor data behind it. So I'm going to lean towards, just being a bit careful, having a bit, not going towards radical solutions with poor data, and encouraging desisting, which seems to be the best solution we have at the moment. And until it is fully known, post-puberty or adulthood, I always want to lean towards the most positive outcomes for people, and that is not struggling with transgenderism and body dysmorphia in the first place.
Jeez, what a convo. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed. I think that's a good staff for you there, too.
Oh, you.
Epic.